to everything and anybody. I mean, I made a few real mistakes in my life, being over-trusting, but you can't measure. You can't give a quarter. Throughout my life, people have tried to pin a single identity on me. To the public, to the press, and to the suits in Los Angeles, I was James Bond. I was the dashing hero in the bespoke tuxedo, holding a martini, smirking through every crisis, and saving the world with a suave quip before the credits rolled. But let me set the record straight once and for all. James Bond was a character. He was a piece of fiction written on paper and brought to life through camera angles, lighting, and blood, sweat, and tears. Sean Connery, on the other hand, is a living, breathing, uncompromising man from Fountainbridge, Edinburgh. I was a milkman, a lorry driver, and a bodybuilder, long before I ever stepped foot on a soundstage, and I learned early on in the rough streets of Scotland that respect is earned, honesty is paramount, and bullshit is unacceptable. In Hollywood, hypocrisy is treated as a virtue. People smile at you while stabbing you in the back, slide contracts across tables designed to steal your hard-earned labor, and pretend that art is being made while lining their own pockets at your expense. I never played that game. I never suffered fools, I never bowed to studio bosses, and I certainly never let anyone mistake my quiet composure for weakness. When I was crossed, lied to, or exploited, I did not forget, and I certainly did not stay silent. Over a career spanning more than half a century, I built a reputation for being blunt. Some called me difficult, others called me ruthless. I call it having a backbone. I am going to talk about 5 individuals who, through their greed, arrogance, incompetence, or dishonesty, earned my utter disdain. These are the men who tested my patience, betrayed my trust, and pushed me to the absolute limit. Some of them I eventually came to terms with after the dust settled, but others I took a firm stand against until the very end. Let us begin. When you talk about the business of filmmaking, you inevitably come across men who believe that because they hold the checkbook, they own the human beings doing the work. Albert Cubby Broccoli was precisely that kind of man. When Cubby and Harry Saltzman hired me to play James Bond in Dr. No, I was a young working-class actor looking for a solid opportunity. I poured everything I had into that role. I gave Bond his stride, his swagger, his edge, and his vocal cadence. Together, we built something unprecedented. The franchise exploded into a global, multi-million-dollar empire that generated unbelievable wealth across the globe. Yet, as the box office billions rolled in, where did that leave me? It left me locked tightly into an archaic, rigid contract that paid me pennies relative to the fortune being generated off my face, my voice, and my body. Cubby sat in his lavish suites, smoking expensive cigars and counting astronomical profits, while treating me like a hired laborer who should simply be grateful for the scraps falling off the table. He refused to renegotiate my pay in good faith. He viewed me not as a partner who co-created a cinematic cultural miracle, but as a piece of studio property. To make matters infinitely worse, there was a total, callous disregard for my basic privacy and safety. When we were shooting You Only Live Twice in Japan, the press hysteria was out of control. I could not walk down a hallway without being swarmed. It reached a point of utter degradation when paparazzi literally followed me into a public bathroom to photograph me while I was using the toilet. When I complained about the total lack of security and the violation of my dignity, Cubby shrugged it off as the price of fame. That was the final straw. My self-respect was not for sale. The working environment became so venomously toxic that I delivered a strict ultimatum. I refused to step onto the set if Cubby Broccoli was anywhere in sight. If he walked onto the soundstage, I walked off. We spent the remainder of that production communicating through intermediaries, breathing fire through third parties. Did I ever reconcile with Cubby Broccoli? Absolute nonsense. Our bitter fallout lasted for more than 30 years. People asked me for decades if I would bury the hatchet, pick up the phone, or sit down for a drink with him. I refused. I believe in loyalty, fair dealing, and mutual respect. When someone spends years financially exploiting your labor and ignoring your human dignity, you do not simply brush it under the rug because time has passed. When Cubby passed away years later, members of the press asked if I would attend his funeral to pay my respects. I did not go. Going to a man's funeral when you could not stand him in life is the ultimate act of Hollywood hypocrisy. I stayed away, true to my principles to the very end. If Cubby Broccoli represented the ruthless financial greed of old Hollywood, Stephen Norrington represented the absolute visual chaos and incompetence of the modern studio system. In 2003, I agreed to star in and executive produce The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I was a veteran of this industry with decades of experience under my belt, having worked with true cinematic masters like Alfred Hitchcock, John Huston, and Sidney Lumet. I knew how a set should be run, with discipline, efficiency, preparation, and mutual respect for the crew's time. What I encountered on Norrington's set in Prague was an absolute nightmare of amateurish delusion. Stephen Norrington was a director who had no business commanding a major motion picture budget or managing hundreds of cast and crew members. His working style was erratic, agonizingly slow, and completely chaotic. He spent hours obsessing over insignificant technical gimmicks while completely neglecting the story, the scene pacing, and the actors. Days were wasted on endlessly repeated takes for no logical reason, dragging production into a swamp of frustration. The pressure reached a explosive, near-physical boiling point over a prop, a massive elephant gun used by my character, Alan Quatermain. We had spent hours sitting around doing nothing because Norrington was wringing his hands over trivial details. Suddenly, without warning or clear justification, he shut down an entire full day of shooting, costing the studio tens of thousands of dollars, simply because he was unhappy with the visual look of the prop gun. I walked over to demand an explanation for why he was wasting everyone's time and ruining the morale of the crew. Instead of acting like a professional leader, Norrington threw a temper tantrum, stepped up into my face, and screamed at me to punch him in the jaw. I looked at this out-of-control, manic individual, realized I was dealing with someone utterly unhinged, and walked straight off the set before I did something I might regret. I publicly stated later that the man was insane and belonged in a local asylum, and I meant every single word. That horrific experience was so soul-crushing that it literally drove me to retire from screen acting altogether. There was no reconciliation with Stephen Norrington, nor was there ever the slightest possibility of one. He was a man who single-handedly destroyed my desire to make movies, draining every ounce of joy out of a craft I had dedicated my entire life to perfecting. When The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen finished shooting, I wiped my hands clean of him forever. I never spoke to him again. I never answered a single inquiry regarding his career, and I made sure the film industry understood precisely why I chose to walk away from the silver screen. Some bridges are not just burned, they are blown to ash, and Norrington destroyed his beyond repair. It is impossible to speak of my time as James Bond without addressing the other half of the producing partnership, Harry Saltzman. If Cubby Broccoli was the calculating business manager, Harry Saltzman was the theatrical, aggressive force who treated the talent like circus animals. Together, they formed a double-headed dragon of corporate greed that dominated my early career, but Harry had a particular way of rubbing salt directly into open wounds. Harry possessed a condescending attitude that was deeply offensive to anyone with self-respect. He viewed actors not as creative partners but as replaceable commodities, glorified dancing monkeys meant to jump when told to jump, smile when told to smile, and hand over millions in profit while taking home a standardized wage. During the height of Bond mania, the producers were making tens of millions from commercial licensing, merchandise, toys, and international box office receipts. Yet, whenever I raised legitimate questions about back-end participation or receiving a fair slice of the immense economic pie I was personally creating, Harry would dismiss my concerns with unbelievable arrogance. By the time we reunited to shoot Diamonds Are Forever in 1971, the toxic atmosphere on set was almost unbearable. The tension between myself and Saltzman was so thick that crew members walked on eggshells whenever we were in the same room. I could not stand his presence, his dismissive tone, or the outrageous hypocrisy of a man making a fortune off my physical back, while treating me with total disrespect. I fulfilled my contractual duties like a professional, gave the performance required of me, but made it crystal clear that I was done being manipulated by men who valued paper currency over basic human fairness. Just as with Broccoli, I completely severed all ties with Harry Saltzman once my commitments ended. I refused to harbor false sentimentality when he fell on hard times later in life, or when the Bond franchise moved forward without us. When Harry passed away in 1994, I maintained my strict personal policy: no hypocritical mourning, no false statements for the media, and no attendance at his funeral. Harry Saltzman made his choices in how he treated people during his lifetime, and he lived with those choices. I owed him nothing, and I gave him precisely that. While my feuds with directors and producers on set were intense, my disdain extended equally to the boardrooms of studio executives who operated on deception. Peter Goober, the head of Mandalay Entertainment, provided me with a masterclass in modern corporate dishonesty, and it resulted in one of the most aggressive legal battles of my late career. In the early 2000s, Goober approached me with a project titled Endgame. The proposal was straightforward. I was to star in and produce the thriller. We entered into detailed negotiations, signed agreements, and mapped out production timelines. Goober made grand promises regarding Mandalay's full financial backing, assuring me that the capital was secured, the distribution deals were firmly in place, and the project was greenlit and ready to go. Based on these explicit promises and formal assurances, I committed my time, turned down other lucrative acting opportunities, and invested substantial personal energy into developing the project. Then, the truth came out. It turned out that Goober and his executives had deliberately misled me regarding the financial stability and backing of the project. They used my name, my reputation, and my attached star power as leverage to secure third-party interest, while masking the reality that Mandalay did not have their end of the deal secured. When the House of Cards collapsed, they tried to quietly walk away from the deal, leaving me holding the bag after sacrificing months of valuable time and professional availability. I was furious. I do not tolerate people who treat business contracts like disposable napkins. I launched an $11 million lawsuit against Goober and Mandalay Entertainment to hold them accountable for their deceit. Did we reconcile in the traditional friendly sense? No. But from a professional and legal perspective, this matter was resolved. Unlike my personal grudges on film sets, business feuds with studio executives come down to legal accountability. Goober and his legal team quickly realized that I was not an actor who could be intimidated by corporate lawyers or dragged out through endless legal delays. I was prepared to fight them in court to the bitter end, facing a devastating public court battle and the real prospect of defeat. Goober's team came to the table and settled the matter legally out of court. Once the financial damages were settled and my rights were vindicated, I put the matter behind me. I never worked with Goober again, but justice was served and the debt was paid. Finally, we come to a category of people I detested throughout my career: actors who treated the film set like a mirror for their own vanity. On my final film, while Stephen Norrington was the primary target of my rage, the atmosphere was further poisoned by the unprofessional behavior of figures like Jack Carson and other young dramatic actors who lacked the discipline required for true filmmaking. In my view, acting is a craft and a job. You arrive on time, you learn your lines, you respect your fellow actors, you hit your mark, and you deliver the work. You do not bring your fragile ego, your personal drama, or your endless need for validation onto a soundstage where hundreds of hard-working crew members are laboring 12 hours a day. Yet, on modern film sets, I increasingly encountered young performers who acted like divas. They delayed setups because their hair wasn't perfect, argued over pointless character beats that made no sense, and threw dramatic fits if the camera wasn't angled to capture their best side. This obsession with image over substance drove me up the wall. During filming, when actors broke the rhythm of a scene, demanded constant retakes out of personal vanity, or acted as though the entire production revolved around their individual comfort, it disrupted the organic flow of the work. I had worked with true giants: Gielgud, Olivier, Mason, Men who possessed immense talent yet approached the work with humility and ironclad discipline. Seeing modern actors treat production time with such casual disregard was an insult to the craft. When it came to co-stars and actors on set, my approach to reconciliation was grounded in professional, pragmatic reality. Unlike producers who stole money or directors who ruined productions, on-set personality clashes were often the result of youth, arrogance, and lack of discipline. Once the cameras stopped rolling and the productions wrapped, I did not hold lifelong personal vendettas against these young actors. I made my displeasure known immediately and forcefully on set to fix the behavior in the moment. Once the film was finished, I left the friction behind on the soundstage. I maintained a professional distance, wished them well in their future endeavors, and hoped they would eventually grow up, mature, and learn how to conduct themselves like real professionals in this industry. Looking back across the long landscape of my life and career, I offer no apologies for the stands I took, the fights I fought, or the bridges I burned. Life is far too short and self-respect is far too precious to spend your days bowing to arrogant studio bosses, coddling incompetent directors, or staying silent while people take advantage of your hard work. The film industry is a strange, glittering circus. It can grant you immense fame and fortune, but it can also hollow you out if you allow it to dictate your principles. I walked into Hollywood as a proud working-class Scotsman, and I walked out of it with my pride, my integrity, and my identity completely intact. I fought for every penny I was owed, I stood up to bullies holding contract folders, and I walked away from the camera on my own terms when the business lost its soul. To those 5 individuals, and to anyone else who mistook my silence for compliance or my accent for weakness, my message remains unchanged. I judged men by their actions, their honesty, and their respect for others. Where those qualities were missing, you earned my cold fury and my total disdain. Where respect was given, it was returned tenfold. I leave you tonight with this final piece of advice. Never let anyone own you. Never let anyone dictate your worth, and never be afraid to stand your ground, no matter how powerful your opponent may seem. Thank you, and may you always have the courage to speak your truth without compromise.